So, welcome everyone to tonight's episode of Confidently in Charge. I am your host, Allison KT. I'm a certified leadership coach and the founder of PoppyLead, which is a leadership development company that is really focused on helping new entrepreneurs and growing leaders who are looking around and like, holy crap, I'm in charge. What just happened? So I love coming in and helping people kind of figure out their unique strengths and what makes them really leaders. And basically, I love using this space to remind everybody that we're all leaders, whether we are leading a team of people, whether we are leading our families, whether we are the person in our friend group, making sure we're staying social during quarantine safely, or whether you're leading yourself. We're all leaders, and sometimes that can be really challenging, and it can be hard to own that leadership. It can be hard to know what to do with that leadership. And as we'll hear in Aden's story, sometimes leadership is sort of like thrust upon you, and you're like, wait a second, am I the person for this? Are you talking to me right now? And so we're going to hear a little bit more of her story. So basically, I'll give you a quick introduction to Aden. She is a trained neuroscientist with a master's in neuroscience. She's also a certified neuro-linguistic practitioner. And she really kind of followed her calling and followed the urging that was pushing her to go into the world of entrepreneurship with her company Mind Medication. And Mind Medication is really a fusion of neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality, all kind of based around like mindset coaching. And she actually recently authored the book on mind training, The Secret for Positive Living, which is available for pre-order on her website. And I am also blessed to be among the early readers of it in the book club. And I can tell you that it is a phenomenal book. She's a great storyteller and has like just this fascinating narrative going on. And so that is a little bit about Aden. I would love to pass the mic to you now, Aden, if you want to tell us a little bit more about, who you are, and we'll kind of start from there.
Yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. So yeah, my name is Aden Eyob. I'm a clinical neuroscientist and again, the author of the upcoming book, Mind Training, The Secret for Positive Living. But it wasn't always like this. From the age of 6, I had big dreams to be my own boss, dreams to build a mental health center, dreams to free my family from poverty. But all I heard was no. Everyone told me it was impossible, but I held a flicker of hope. I then had an epiphany to find my way to my why. And my why was to unlock light and love into your aspirations, your desires, and your gifts. And this in turn obviously led me to establish Mind Medication. As Allison stated, it's a fusion of neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality-based mindset coaching, speaking, and training service. So I work primarily with creative leaders, helping them to uncover their why, unlock their potential, and free the limiting beliefs to achieve their impossible desires. And so this journey has definitely been one I would call a whirlwind, where I've had to discover who I am and the leadership position that sort of the universe threw at me. I was always one to shy away from leadership unless it took away from my time or resources. Then I would find myself being more assertive and then falling back in line to allow others to lead. And so what the entrepreneurial journey has done is actually helped me to manage my own leadership, and in doing so, help others with their leadership styles as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Like, you've sort of taken what's happened to you and the experiences you've had, and rather than getting wrapped up in this place of like, but everybody's telling me no, and like, I can't do this. Like, you listened to that little tiny thing within you, that little 6-year-old who was like, I'm going to create a place for people to handle their mental health someday. And like, amazing to like live into that. So, I kind of want to start like at the beginning with that, because you knew from the get-go that you wanted this, and like you met all of this kind of negative, like, no, this can't happen, this can't happen. But like so many entrepreneurs and like leaders, I'm sure there's had to be this feeling of being called to more. So when did you start experiencing kind of that calling, and what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, so obviously from 6, I knew what I wanted and would also find myself in confrontation with my grandma, who was very old school and was like, no, you're 6, be a 6-year-old. I'm like, no, I'm going to lead. Just you wait, grandma. But obviously throughout life, that also, I started to listen to that from not just my grandma, and I love her and care for her. And that's just an attitude that is from a different generation. But I started to listen to the outside noise, and I started to believe and accept that. And so there was a season in my life where I wasn't pursuing my passions and desires, and it was very stagnant. And in that season, I started to feel very uncomfortable. And it was only about 3 years ago that I had my epiphany, when the universe finally said, it's time for you to resume, get back on track with your purpose, get back with the leadership position that I'm putting you in. And that looked really scary, actually, because I wasn't ready for it. I don't know if anyone is ever ready to really take that step. So there was a lot of fear associated with that, and that notion of, now I have to be vulnerable and really go inwards and see the ugliness that may be lurking, that's stopping me from pursuing my passion, was quite terrifying at the time. But how that looked for me was about 3 years ago. I was actually sleeping, and I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and with just this epiphany, like, I need a business. That's what I need to do. I had no idea how to create a business. I'm a scientist, like zero skills whatsoever, but I felt this life force just not allowing me to sleep. I was desperately trying to sleep. It's like 3 a.m. This is just not acceptable behavior. I was trying to sleep and it was just not happening. And so I found myself on Facebook creating a business page, trying to figure out what to call this business that I've just now decided I'm going to have. And that creative mania was intense. I slept maybe about 58 minutes in that night. And I remember just hearing these messages of the direction I should take, just even with the name Mind Medication. So it was almost like mind. And I was like, well, what about mind? What can I do with mind? Like mind, thought, mindfulness. And it was just nope, error. And then I was like, okay, well, what do I already have? What skills do I already have? What experiences do I already have? I've studied neuroscience. I've studied psychology. What can I do with this? And that's when it really clicked. It's mind medication, and it's not medication of prescription, but really just reprogramming that mindset of thinking in poverty and thinking in limitations, and just really pushing that boundary and going for the things that people tell you no, because only you can say no to yourself, right? And so for me, it really just started that night, 3 o'clock in the morning, with the universe and I just going on a creative mania. And from there, I just started to listen to the inner voice, which I wasn't doing in the past. I was very critical and very analytical about my decisions. And so the fact that now I have a voice inside and also guidances from the universe through other people was something that I was not familiar with. And so I found myself in this ego battle between what I wanted and what didn't seem real. And so there was definitely a lot of season where I've had to battle that and really force myself to accept and be vulnerable in the process.
Yeah, that reminds me of a section that I was reading in the book that really resonated with me, where you were discussing being at a church service, and like it was after your friend, like somehow Aden just had this friend who like knew that she needed to go back to church, and this friend just like up and asked her one day, like, when are you going to church again? When are you going to come to church with me? And like that was not a thing that they talked about. And so it was sort of just this like experience of like, yo, you need to get back in touch with your spirituality. And so you described going to this service and the experience of like the music and the worship being just like this embrace and this warm, comfortable, like, oh, I want to bask in this forever. And then the aspects of like the sermon and the talking and the speaking, and like that's when, you know, your mind starts to wander and like the head things come back of like, you know, thinking and like judging yourself and all of those kinds of thoughts. And so like to me that resonated in the terms of like really connection to the heart versus like, and being in the heart versus being in the head with things. So I wanted to ask about kind of that experience, for this with you, like in terms of having this connection and receiving this kind of guidance, like how do you open yourself for that, or how do you kind of make that flow in your life?
Yeah, so at the beginning it was very challenging, like I mentioned, but I think what really helped is I'm a pattern seeker. I like to see patterns. And when I started to see that, I started to ask myself, why are you resisting this? What is this resistance for? And when I started to unravel that, instead of this doesn't make sense, I began to understand that I am the block. It's actually not others, or it's not the universe. The universe is simply trying to help me, but I am being my own worst enemy. And so that's when I started to stop saying this is just a coincidence, and start to listen. And by listen, it's not listening just to answer, it's listening to understand others and listening to understand myself. So going inwards, asking myself, what do I want? What does Aden want? How is Aden going to pursue your desire? And so that also looked like by doing like affirmation statements and saying to myself, I am powerful, I am an attentive listener, I am trusting of the universe. And by saying I'm actually talking to my subconscious mind very directly, because I'm using the identity level of words of I am. And equally so, I begin to also do surrender statements. So things such as fear and doubt and being judgmental and critical, I started to say, I surrender the need to be critical because I trust other people's opinion as well as my own. So, or I surrendered the need to be fearful because I am infinitely and abundantly made. And so it was just about going inwards and asking myself, what is it that I really want? And then challenging the word use that I was using and replacing it with the positive intention. And so there's various mindset tools, obviously, that I've employed in this journey. These were just some that really helped. And also meditation to really calm my mind and stop operating from the fear-based amygdala and more so from the executive brain. So these were some of the things that really helped in that journey. And just really overall trusting in the universe, trusting that there's something bigger than me that's got my back. So I can move boldly. I can make decisions boldly, because nothing that I do will be a mistake. A mistake is something I say is a mistake. So I've put that term that it is a mistake. So if I change that language pattern and say that it's a stepping stone to success, it infinitely opens up my subconscious mind to more ways in which I can actually reach my destination. So these are some of the things that helped me, and I believe can help others as well, especially when it comes to self-leadership, is that I cannot lead anybody if I don't lead myself first. And so the way I do that is by actually going inward, seeking the areas that need healing that through infinite intelligence, guidance from those that infinite intelligence sends my way, but also just being willing to be a student, accept that I don't have all the answers, and that I'm just a jigsaw in a very beautiful fabric of the universe. And therefore I need to be open and vulnerable to express that I need that help as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you just said like so many amazing little nuggets that I want to like grab on and like digest and all of that. Like, I feel like you just in that flow kind of like hit on like, this is the purpose of life, or like, this is the secret. Like, you're having a hard time, go inward and like figure out what that little piece is, figure out what that pain is. And also like what tremendous, like neuro-linguistic little tricks of like, I am, and like really owning that. Like I'll admit some vulnerability for myself. Like this morning I was having a really rough go of it. And like, I was just down, and I've been seeking so much external validation, especially in business, of feeling like I'm always talking to customers, like, look at me, look at me, look at me, and like seeking that. And so I started kind of looking at, my own worthiness outside of that. And so actually like, as I was reading your book earlier this morning, as I was like, okay, I got to shake this like wacky feeling I'm having, I did connect with that aspect of like, I am worthy without, even if nobody pays attention to me. Like I am worthy even if, no one comes to my events. I'm worthy, like regardless. There's this inherent worthiness to me. And so I love that aspect of owning that by claiming, you know, I am an attentive listener. I am these things. That's so incredible. I want to dive in though. You started talking about self-leadership and really the importance of kind of like your mindset in thinking of being a leader for yourself. Can you walk us through a little bit of like, what does leading yourself look like to you?
Yeah, of course. So leading for me looks like doing the things that I say I will do. So taking accountability, not saying you do this, but Aden, you're going to do that and others will follow when it's the right season. So it's about actually practicing what you preach ultimately. And that looks like in every aspect of my life. It's not just within business, but what I do in business will impact my relationships, will impact my desires. And so it's about creating this harmony between all sectors of my life. And the way I do that is really asking myself, what is it that I would love to see in others as well? And making sure that that's something I apply. So if it's about being compassionate, instead of saying, well, I don't have that, create that compassion, or more so identify the areas in my life that is lacking in compassion and work through that to clear that and get into a headspace where compassion just naturally flows. If I'm not listening to others, then I shouldn't expect to be listened to. So it's about looking at the areas where, okay, I don't like this in a person. That just simply tells me that that's a reflection of myself. So if I don't like people who are bossy, that then told me like, Aden, you're bossy, so work on that. So instead of criticizing others, or instead of saying you, go backwards to I. So what is it about this behavior and characteristics I don't like? I must have that because I'm reacting and resonating to it. So it's really about assessing the good, the bad, and the straight ugly, and then working towards that on yourself. And when you do that, what happens is naturally the frequency increases. And so I will start to attract people who naturally are on that vibration. And so I lead not by telling others what to do, but by telling myself what I need to do, and then others will follow.
I love that. You're like completely living into that, controlling like what's in your locus of control. Like you can't change or like make another person react a certain way. Like if you have a toxic coworker, you can't make that coworker not toxic. Like,
Yeah.
like that's not in your control. Your control is like, okay, how do I respond to this? How do I like, what can I control about the situation? Um, yeah, like that aspect. I mean, I'm so like this whole self-leadership aspect of like looking at the pieces and seeing the reflections of others, like that I imagine feels challenging, and like I feel my own self having resistance to that at times and thinking like, oh yeah, that person, you know, they're maybe highlighting something within me that I find negative. And it reminds me of when I was in coach training, and like we talked a lot about the fact that like people can't push our buttons unless we have a button that can be pushed. Like sometimes the button, like we have to, in a way, you know, kind of allow that button to continue existing in our life, like if that button is going to exist. And so yeah, that's where it's challenging. And like I know I feel the fear of like, ooh, you pushed my buttons, I'm just gonna like retract and not do anything about it. But what I hear is maybe some like leaning into like, where did that button come from? What is this bringing up in me? When else has this happened in my life? So amazing. Yes. How has this kind of leadership that you've been embracing in your own life and in your business, how is that sort of affecting your life overall? Or like, is leadership confined to an area for you, or do you see it as a blanket over everything?
It's a blanket over everything. So it, of course, I think our modern day society has leadership in terms of a very strict, rigid rule, but you lead your family, you lead your friends, you lead your people, your tribe. I do the same. So leadership is something that we each do. We may not know it because it doesn't fit the box of the status quo, but everyone leads in some way or another, whether that's good or bad. And so for me, leadership is in every area of my life. So how I show up every single day will be telling of the influence I'll have in my family, in my business, in my career, in my hobbies, whatever area that is. I have to show up the way I want to show up, and I have to do that intentionally, and I have to do that with a sense of integrity and compassion. And so leadership isn't something that I can say, okay, it's only for my business, and then outside of that I don't need to lead. However, saying that, there is a beauty in the wisdom of leadership, in that it's good to also be led. So we lead, I lead, but at the same time, it's good to learn from those who've led in a more graceful manner. And so that's when being a student is also important. And as a leader, it's ever so important to be a student, because there's always something I will need to learn and refine and polish in order to be able to serve my people. And so I think in our current climate, that isn't always shown what true leadership should look like. And so I believe that leadership isn't something that is solely confined to one compartment of your life. We're created as a whole. So it's impossible for me to think that leadership is just a quadrant, because it's like an organ, will affect the other parts of my organ. And so I have to look at it from a holistic lens of mind, body, spirit. How do I lead? How do I show up every day? And being very conscious of that and intentional.
Mm-hmm. Yes, like that aspect of like, how do I show up, and like the intentionality behind that. I love that so much. And it reminds me of, like, I posted something on Instagram yesterday about how entrepreneurship has made my house both messier and cleaner, because like on the one hand it's way messier because my brain is always 85 places, and I've got my hands in like all the Google Docs, and I'm on the phone, and like everything's happening, and so of course there's a mess around. But then like there's also an aspect of like holding myself to a higher standard of like, I don't want to live in filth. And so like I will try to find little times to like tidy up, or I will try to find like more of I used to get really wrapped up in the like toxic productivity mindset of like, oh, but I have, time while the water's heating up. I should be checking my email or something, rather than using that time to like calm, quiet. And so I get myself wrapped up in like, oh, I don't have time to wash a dish. Like, I'll just get it later. But I feel like entrepreneurship, and sort of not even that, but just even like thinking of myself as a leader, like regardless of what I do, and like, regardless of what I do, regardless of like how I'm showing up, I can still be that leader, and I can still intentionally think like, this is how I want to show up. So yes, I love that so much, that like aspect of it can blossom out, and it doesn't have to be a moment. And so I'm still thinking about like kind of the fear of coming into like this place. Like, we're talking about the beautiful power of like, oh yes, I'm a leader, and it's helping me clean my house, and like I'm feeling so leveled up in all areas of my life. But I'm still thinking back to like the fear of like giving into and living up to that potential. And so, could you describe maybe an experience where you like overcame some of this fear, and like just sort of said like, okay, I'm all in, I'm doing this?
Yeah, so there's been many moments. One that is actually before even starting my business is I used to work in a pharmaceutical company, and I was a manager there. But because I said I'm a manager, I sort of set myself up for that role and that mindset of, I just manage, I don't need to take leadership position. And so it was a meeting we had, and the senior leaderships were in place, and they were looking for answers and solutions for some IT stuff. And I had the answers, but because I told myself I'm a manager, I sort of took a back seat and said, this is no longer applicable to me. And it was, then I challenged myself to say, well, why is that? Why have I said this is no longer important to me? Why am I not taking accountability and responsibility for this? And so when I realized that, it's actually just based on fear of being expressing myself, fear of being seen, that's when it really hit me that it's not that I can't lead, it's just that I'm afraid of what it would entail and what people will say if I do so. And so I made that decision to, at that moment, to break that fear, because if I live in this loop of fear, then that is the environment I will stay. That's the stagnation. So I just decided on that split moment, I said, do you want to be based on fear consistently, or do you want to live in abundance? And it was just a snap decision, and I just did it. I was very scared, but I tapped into universal realm, infinite source, in that is the source that will get me to break through that fear barrier, because fear is essentially our ego in overdrive. And so if I just keep telling myself I'm scared, then that is exactly what my subconscious mind is going to replay. And so in that moment, I just made a conscious and executive decision that I am not going to sit here with the answers and stay silent, because the more I stay silent, the more I will be impacted as well. So I had to bring it back to myself of, if I don't give them the knowledge that they seek, it's going to come back and repeat itself. And I'm going to live in fear constantly because I'm not showing up. I'm not showing who Aden is on a consistent basis.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes. Like that moment of, I'm done playing small. I'm done with this nonsense of like trying and failing and sabotaging myself and all of that, like that executive decision moment of like, bam, this is it. I'm done. I'm listening. I'm here. Like that's such a powerful decision. And how, what kind of changes did you notice for yourself after making that, like, I'm done with the bullshit? Like, what did you realize after that?
Well, one is that I have this power, and it was a shocking revelation when I did it. Everyone started to notice, whoa, why didn't you say something before? What happened? And so I started to notice that the energy changed, but I also started to feel good. I realized like I loved it. It wasn't from a place of I like telling you what to do. It was this assertiveness that I hadn't been accustomed to, and that I actually shared my gift. And that's really what was important, is that in that leadership moment, I shared what was already within. And in doing so, I was able to help myself and help others. And so that was a very amazing feeling that money can't even give me. And so it's that being able to help others in the journey. And so I started to see leadership as an opportunity to really give that something that was already in. So there is no extra thing I have to learn. It's already within. I just have to polish it and be vulnerable and open to share that with the individuals who need that, and not be afraid and hold back the truths that I have inside.
Yes. Like just tapping into that, what exists within you, and acknowledging that like, I am powerful all on my own. And I do know the answers, and like, I trust that like when I need that next step, the next step will be illuminated and I'll know where to go. And like, I'm just going to keep standing on this stone on my little lit path until like, I know where to step forward. And so that leads me to the kind of the question of like, is this sort of thing like a natural, innate something, or like, can I learn skills, one, to like tap into my innate, and two, just to like learn more about leadership in general?
Yeah. So for me, and my perspective is that it's both. So for me, I had leadership within me. That was something that was a raw material within inside. It's the gift that I had from infinite intelligence. But if I didn't apply it, then it would have stayed a raw material, right? So that's where the environment is needed to really perfect and polish and practice. And I look at much like a diamond in its raw state, it's there, but it's got all the qualities it needs, right? But it's through that process of refinement and polishing that the beauty is really seen. And so leadership isn't something that is just purely learned or that is just nature. I think it's a combination of the two that really is required for it to be fully expressed. Having said that, it can be mastered. So there isn't that, I wouldn't say to be fearful that, everyone has to be in leadership. No, like that is where you tap in to understand, is this a calling? Is this a gift that I have been given? So is this something I need to do consistently in my everyday position? Or is this something I need to do on a small scale, on a local scale with the community that I'm surrounded with? And that's something that you will find when you do self-reflection and mindset, mindset exercises. So yes, to answer your question, it's both. You can't have just one without the other.
I love that. Like, yes, it does exist within you, but like, yes, that does mean you have a obligation to use those gifts. Like, I think of that I mean, to me, like, I've always sort of thought like the grand purpose of life is to look at the unique strengths and gifts I was given, and then like puzzle piece those into the needs that exist in the world. And so like, I very much hear this, like, yes, like tap into those innate gifts that you have, learn about them, learn what they look like for you, learn all of that. Because like, yes, I totally agree with like figuring out what it is for you, because like there are coaches in the world who are like, I can get you to 7 figures. And like, part of me is like, I don't know if I need to make 7 figures. Like, I just like, that would be dope. Like, Morgan, please help me make 7 figures. Morgan, my wealth lady on the call. But like, you know, like just being in alignment with like what your needs are and what your like leadership is. Like, if it doesn't feel like authentic and in line for you to like get up in front and lead a group of people, like, cool, don't force that. Maybe you lead one-on-one with people and have like really high-powered, high-touch conversations, or maybe you're like that best friend that they can call, or like, you know, whatever your leadership position is. So yeah, like Morgan just popped in, I lead better one-on-one. For sure,
Right.
it's hard to lead a group and like to manage everybody's energy, and like it's all about just knowing, what do I want to do in my life? How do I want to do this? So
yeah, and I like to add that, you know, leadership in its basic sense is influence. So if you look at it from that, it becomes easier. So if you're, you know, Morgan, one-on-one, how are you influencing one-on-one? That's leadership. If it's a group, how are you influencing the group? That's also leadership. And leadership isn't some grand thing, you know, you have to do world domination. Like, that's what society tells us. But really, at its basic, even, you know, Jesus had 12 disciples and he had that mass influence. So it's looking at it from a small scale, like, this is you, this is your sphere of influence, this is the incidence. You can influence outward, but first start with yourself, lead yourself, and look at it from the word choice of, how am I influencing this person? But first of all, how am I influencing myself? And then from that, say, how am I influencing this person? And so I think when that leadership terminology is removed with something that's more comfortable, it becomes easier for the natural abilities to flow out.
yes, oh, 100%. Leadership, I feel like, is such a stuffy term, or like a term that people have a hard time identifying with. I wrote a blog earlier this month about the 5 myths of leadership, and it's totally hitting on that. Like, I need to have a certain title, I need to have a certain level of experience, I need to have a team of people, I need to know how to do all the things. Like, we have all of these little like prerequisites for being leaders. And it sounds like, you know, when we just own and say, like, regardless of who is existing outside of me, like, I'm going to lead myself, I'm going to control my response, I'm going to choose how I respond to a situation rather than just like knee-jerk reacting to it. So that's amazing. And I would love to kind of highlight, like, you've shown a little bit in just your sharing about like kind of the power of language, and the power of language in terms of our mindset and sort of what we, you know, how we speak to ourselves and all of that. So I would love to ask maybe about, like, what do you think some of the most important aspects are of, you know, self-leadership? Like what do I need, what can I expect to like find within myself if I start kind of looking for self-leadership?
Yeah, so we start with word choice is very powerful, and I say that because the words we speak will be the manifestation we see. And so if I use words that are fail, so I wish, I want, I try, that is telling my subconscious mind that it is not important. There's no effort required. And so that is where the word choices are going to be powerful, in that it needs to be action-based, and leadership is action-based. It's taking responsibility and accountability. So instead of saying, I wish, I say, I will. So there's an act of accountability and action. I can, I am. These are the words that will get me to move forward, but really convince the subconscious mind to actually unlock the gates of what leadership in that sense will look like. And so in terms of characteristics, the things that I've identified for me that are really important are the act of listening, really. And when I say listening, is that a leader should be able to remain silent enough to understand the room, and what should be last to speak, and not last to speak because there isn't anything in their thought, but to be a really effective leader, you have to understand the room. And then you'll be able to put it into a puzzle. And then you do that by being able to speak last. And so there's also when you listen and you make it at a point to speak last, you're also checking your ego. You're saying that my opinion in that instant moment is not important. I will serve others, because leadership is all about serving, by listening and listening intently to the room. And then I will add my feedback. And so it's the act of servitude. As a leader, do you have the characters of serving others? And if you don't, that is a trigger that needs to go inwards and say, well, why is that? What has happened in my past that I am unable to serve others? What is it that my ego wants that is not allowing me to serve others? And so check that. And then there is a sense of humility with leadership that is really required. So in order for me to really read the room and be powerful and a leader, I have to be humble. I have to be okay with not being right about everything, because I am not right about everything. Everybody has something to add to the equation. And so humility will be a very powerful characteristic to have in really just being able to influence others. And I would also say compassion. So leading with the heart, a true leader leads with the heart. Like even Jesus led with his heart, or at least told us that, go into the heart light, because the heart and love is the highest frequency. And this is just even looking at it from a brain map. It's the highest frequency. And so if I lead from the heart and with love, I'm actually showing you my full abilities, but also I'm raising the bar of the frequency, the mental frequency, high enough that you will be able to come up with me on that. So in doing so, I'm bringing you on that journey of leadership rather than doing the boss leader kind of dynamic. And then it's really about summing it all up with integrity and having the right communication. So I communicate myself to you. I'm not going to bring other third parties. I'm going to speak my truths to you and you, only you. And I'm going to do that by being very clear about my communication, because if I'm not clear, I'm not leading you. If you don't understand me, that means I haven't led you correctly.
Yes, like so many aspects of leadership require, like all aspects of leadership require so much, like what you just hit on exactly. The leading from the heart, and the leading and making sure people are picking up what you're putting down, and making sure that you're fully aware of what the situation is and what is necessary in it. So yes, I love that so much, that aspect of like, I can expect to find humility. I can expect these different kinds of things coming up. I'm also thinking of like having to really be completely honest with myself, and like sort of the level of vulnerability that's necessary to like look at some of the darker, scarier parts. So I'm curious if you could share or like give any, actionable steps. Like how can we, step into this place? You've mentioned things like affirmations, things like that. Like what are some of your favorite mindset sort of shifts for when you're feeling maybe unmotivated? What's like a great mindset shift that you love for popping into some motivation? Is it noisy?
So I think for me, that some of the tools that have really helped me is really just meditation and on the spot meditation. So there's like binaural beats. So there are days where shifting is going to be a challenge. And so what I do is I listen to binaural beats because the frequency is designed to get me to the destination quicker than if I do a standard meditation. So for example, if I just really need to be calm, I will just tap into a binaural beats that allows me to be calm. And another thing is just doing box breathing. So if I'm faced with somebody who's really triggering, I take time out to pause. So like 5-minute pause of, is this really true? Am I reacting because it's the situation, or am I reacting because of my ego? And so that's where I take the 5-minute pause, remove myself from that situation, and start to do deep breathing. So when I breathe, I'm basically bringing clarity and calmness into my system. But also for the brain, what that does is that when I'm angry, what's happening is that my amygdala is firing off, my primitive brain is just going crazy. And so when I do deep breathing or meditation, it basically silences that and allows me to lead from my executive brain, which is my sensible side of my brain. And so doing deep breathing, box breathing, meditation, but also just, I surrender. So in that moment, I'll say, if I'm angry, I surrender the need to be angry because I'm calm or I'm at peace. I surrender the need to want to figure things out. I surrender the need to be agitated because I'm calm. And so these are some of the things that have helped. But I think one of the really great ones is actually having habits. So in the journey, I really had to develop a real self-discipline. And that how that looked like is by really having really good morning and night habits. And so as a leader, if I'm going to be influencing, I need to have the right mindset. And so how I do that is I have 2 hours or 3 hours in the morning that's just blocked for self-care. And I do things from meditation to yoga. So I take the mind, body, spirit element and do things, gratitude lists, love letters to the universe, and just whatever it takes to really bring my mindset high enough that I can take on the day. And so it becomes like a sandwich exercise. So I'm calm in the morning. Mess could happen throughout the day. And then at night, I also have a routine that taps into my mind, body, spirit, again, meditation or reading, listening to music to calm me down and bring my state to like a delta so I can get good night's sleep. So it's really about creating healthy and powerful habits, both in the morning and at night. So whatever happens throughout the day, you can balance it off because your mind is centered on calm and clarity.
Oh my gosh. That's such a good idea. Like I've been really leaning into like the morning routine and trying to figure out what my optimized morning routine is. But I haven't really given much consideration to like my evening routine or like how I'm sort of like connecting in at the end of the day. And I think like one of the things like for me with routines, and I'll just share this in case it resonates with anyone, is like I have a really hard time like doing what people tell me to do. Like I have a really hard time when it's like, okay, you're going to do 10 minutes of reading and then you're going to do 15 minutes of yoga and then you're going to do a 20-minute meditation and like then you're going to take a shower. I would be like, don't tell me what to do, even if I'm the one telling myself what to do. Like even if I write down before I go to bed, like this is what I'm going to do, like the little rebel in me like kicks up and is like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. And so I have started, I roll a dice every morning. I have a little list 1 through 6 of what it corresponds with. And it's like reading and writing and gratitude lists and like meditating and listening to music at the same time and like these different things. And so every morning I just roll my dice and see like kind of, and you know, that can be a moment where like God, the universe speaks into like, okay, this morning you need to meditate. You don't know this yet, but like you need some quiet time with your brain, or like you need some time to read, or like, you know, so it's that little like gift of like, okay, this is not, I'm not going to force myself what to do, but I also like having a little bit of structure in place of like some options. So this has been amazing. I want to kind of wrap up by like giving you the floor. Like if there's anything that you would love to share or anything that's like coming through, like, oh, we didn't get to talk about this thing, but I would love to share around this topic. take this time, what's on your mind?
Well, I think just really summing it up that, with being a leader, don't overcomplicate it. You're born to lead by nature. And so what may have happened is that society and experiences may have darkened that. So my only thing I would recommend is to really spend some quality time with yourself. And that's an investment in yourself and self-leadership, and say, who am I before the chaos? Or who am I before the world told me I can't lead? And then start to decompartmentalize that and decompress and start to really assess that area of your life, because leadership isn't complicated. It's just, we're told that it is complicated. We can lead because we already lead. It's just something about making that connection between the conscious level of our mind and the subconscious level, and really just understanding that thoughts are things. So there's a formula that I use in my coaching and consulting services that's really like the thought plus the emotion is the behavior. So the next time you're thinking about self-leadership and the behavior isn't where you want it to be, instead of trying to change that behavior, go back to the original source, which is the thought. What thought have you programmed into your subconscious mind that is causing you to trigger that behavior, which is then resulting in the emotion, which is resulting in the behavior you do not like? So that formula is something I would really impart with you and ask that you start to really apply in your day-to-day, is that if the thought isn't serving you, change it. Don't stay stagnant.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. I've done a lot of like talking and reading and like realization over the last couple years about like where thoughts come from, and how like so many of our thoughts come from like well-intentioned comments during childhood. Like you might hear something, hi mom. You might like hear something like one example that a friend of mine experienced was like, whenever she went out with her mom, her mom was always really scared that she was going to get kidnapped, or like was always really scared, was always like, you have to stay close to me. We're going to be in a big crowd of people. Like, you're going to get snatched. You have to stay with me. And so like, obviously her mom was like super well-intentioned and was like, hey, I know you'd like to wander around. Don't wander around here because like I need to keep track of you. But this in turn, taught her to fear large groups of people, to fear public transportation, to like always have this fear of like looking over her shoulder and thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get snatched. Like that's what's going to happen. And so for her, there was a lot of kind of mindset shifting. And I know within myself and within my own business, the thoughts that come up of like, oh, I'm not a capable business owner. And like, I'm looking at where, that's like along the way, I've been very blessed to have a lot of like, you can do whatever you set your mind to kind of energy around me. But then I still feel within my own life, like the little sabotaging beliefs that come out. And so thinking and looking at like, okay, what is this thought? And like, does the thought that like a thought that hurt me for a really long time was that if you don't build a business you need to build a business by yourself to be successful. Like you need to be a self-made business like person, which is sort of nonsensical. And like, I have to say this time around, like building my business by like collaborating with people and talking to people and like engaging with other groups, like that has been the biggest change. And so like 100% like having those negative yucky thoughts tucked away in the back of your head, not serving anyone. So thank you so much for that. And I do want to open the floor for questions. If anyone has any questions or comments, if you want to come off mute, you're more than welcome. If you want to type in the chat, you're more than welcome. But I do want to open for some questions if anybody has some.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've grown up like extremely shy and introverted, and although I've worked through it over the years, I still have an issue when it sort of comes to public speaking, and I don't know why. There's a whole lot of fear and wild energy that happens prior to like any speaking engagement or event. Like I have extreme bouts of like anxiety and like I can't sleep and I think about it even if it's like a week away. Um, I don't know if that ties to leadership because I always figured when I hear, being a leader, like you have to be comfortable with speaking in front of crowds and all of that. So do you have any tips surrounding people who are a bit more sensitive to speaking in front of lots of people and managing that energy, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I'm also an introvert and I had fear of speaking as well. And so I had to really do some inner work, get some NLP and hypnotherapy and that stuff I do anyways. But I think to answer your question, it's about leading comfortably. So it's about going inwards to understand where in your life, preferably within your childhood, can you recall a time where you were fearful? And was that in front of a big audience? And so if that is the case, it's about seeking help, really seeking NLP, seeking whatever coaching service that may help to really break down that language patterning that has told you that anything with a crowd is fearful. And so as a leader, and as an introvert leader, which isn't very common in our day and age, it's very much you have to be extrovert. It does bring in that onus that to be an introverted leader is kind of a bit scary. But I think what I would say to you is ask yourself, how would I want to lead? So what does leadership look like to me? Not what is told to you, but what does leadership look like to you? And act on that. And then where you see growth areas, that's where you seek support, because you will need others to get you into that journey to be comfortable to speak your truths again.
And also, I'm willing to be your hype gal anytime you get pumped up before a public speaking event.
Ooh, next Tuesday.
I think one thing to add too is that when you do speak, it's always powerful to take deep breaths, and that is just purely, I look at it from a science space of like it calms down the brain. So if that trigger is there and you're not yet ready to get NLP or whatever it be, one simple tip you can do is before you speak, take 3 deep breaths, and that basically calms the mind and shuts off the amygdala so you can actually speak comfortably using your executive brain. And also just doing like a 5-10 minute visualization of the audience that you want to see, of how you want to show up before you actually speak.
Okay.
Because you'll raise the vibration higher, and so that you will be able to speak comfortably.
Okay. No, that's great advice because I think for me, I don't know if I have like long-term memory loss, but it's very hard for me to like dig back into my childhood and find a significant event. But I do know maybe a part of it is like a fear of feeling judged and how I'll be perceived. So I am trying to work with that. But yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome. And maybe perhaps one last thing is to say, well, what would happen if I get judged? What is the worst that's going to happen? Write that down and say the reverse. I am ... whatever that is for you, and repeat it daily, because that will speak to your subconscious mind and convince it that this judgment is false. It's something that's been created, and it can be deconstructed and replaced with something powerful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Amazing advice. Any other questions that we have? Curious about links to binaural beats. Lots of videos available. Any recommendations on effective ones?
So I believe it's called Insight Timer. Yeah. I love that one.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's a platform where you can have various types of meditation, but they have like binaural beats, and there's on calmness or money focus that you can use. And I love it because there's different frequencies, like 15 minutes is my cap. So after that, I'm ready to get going. So I would really recommend that. And that's really good. But also you can just play around with binaural beats. The only thing is just check it's a trusted source, because ultimately it is a frequency shift that's happening in your brain, and understand that if you have epilepsy or any kind of triggers, binaural beats isn't recommended, because that obviously will not end well. So if you've got that kind of stroke related epilepsy, please don't go there. There'll be other modalities that will be better serving.
Perfect advice. Yes, I have had a handful of people mention, I think today, this is the 4th time Insight Timer has come up with Morgan's mentioning, you're mentioning, and then I had another person mention it and I saw it in an Instagram story. So like, this is like, there's a part in Morgan's
This is the universe speaking to you, Allison.
where she was like talking about how like she kept noticing all these coincidences in her life, and she was like, these coincidences are everywhere. I can't believe this is happening. And then finally being like, wait a second, maybe instead of like thinking about how weird this is, I should just listen to what keeps showing up. Maybe it's not, maybe there's a lesson here. And so I really think that very strongly. Any other questions before we wrap up? Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, this was amazing. I want to tell you all how to stay in touch. I believe you all know how to stay in touch with me, but for those of you who are listening or watching after the fact, you can stay connected with me via PoppyLead.com. That is where you can always learn about the upcoming episodes of the talk show. You can find links to past episodes of the talk show, and eventually you will find the podcast version of the talk show as well. But you can also stay connected with Aden, and I highly recommend that you do. Her website is mind-medication.com. And she also, like I said, has the book on mind training, The Secret to Positive Living, coming out later this year. It's available for pre-order.
Pre-order. You can just email me at aden@mind-medication.com. And I'm also offering a discovery call. So for any of you who you felt like leadership is something, or even just mindset that's resonated for you, I have a 30-minute discovery call that I'm offering, and you can book that through my website. It's all under the contact list.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and joining us. I hope that you learned, I know I learned all sorts of things. Like now I think maybe just to wrap up, like the thing that's coming to me most is where you talked about taking leadership from like kind of this big generic thing and turning it into like what the actions are, or like turning it into the things like effective listening or public speaking, or like turning it into like not this generic, large, weird, I don't know what to do with leadership thing, but looking instead at like the language that you're using and how is the language that you're using in your brain serving you. So many just little nuggets of mindset wisdom that I am excited to implement in life. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Confidently in Charge will be back on September 3rd. We're going to be talking with Jen Yuhin, who runs the Pledgettes, which is an organization that is really focused on the gender wealth gap and really amplifying women, especially, to own their financial mastery and to feel more confidently in charge of their money, and to feel comfortable with things like negotiating and asking for raises and raising your prices, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it should be a really powerful conversation about how Jen kind of listened to how she was supposed to serve in the world, and what she's created. So we've got that coming up as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Thanks, Aden.
Thank you.